economy here. We've been sheltering in place essentially for 6 months. And now people are starting to talk about, hey, maybe we need to do another lockdown. And obviously, this economic challenge is being felt very differently. In some places, it's an opportunity. Obviously, a lot of people with SaaS software and people who work behind keyboards are having a renaissance, and a lot of the economy is pouring into their keyboards, while restaurants, retail, and anybody who has to work in the real world is part of what's becoming essentially a permanent unemployed class that perhaps this is starting to look like a dry run of UBI. What are your thoughts, Chamath, on this permanent unemployment situation?
I have a bunch of thoughts here. Let me just go kind of give you the stream of consciousness. Like Jerome Powell gave a speech, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks ago in Jackson Hole. And he basically said, like, look, the Federal Reserve is taking a completely new posture on rates. And, they basically clarified that in explicit detail just a few days ago. And they basically said, we're keeping rates where they are until at least 2023. My personal view is for rates are going to stay basically at zero for the next half decade. And I think it's probably pretty likely that we're going to see rates stay at zero probably a full decade. So what does that mean? Okay, well, in a typical recession, what happens is you don't know where the bottom is, right? Things sort of decay. They get a little bit worse. They get a little bit worse. They get a little bit worse. Then things bottom out, and then you start to grow. And you can use interest rate policy to kind of help navigate how soft the landing is, as well as how fast the recovery is. That's sort of like classic economics and how bankers and the markets and all these folks used to work, and it eventually would trickle into Main Street. Now, we just have none of those things. We have rates zero. They're not going to go anywhere. They're not going to go up. They're probably not going to go down. They're going to kind of just stay where they are. That's one thing. Second is we priced in the bottom, which was the first month of the coronavirus. We took the markets basically assuming, there's no growth. And now we've priced things back as if they'll recover. The rating agencies are out to lunch. They've basically said, you know what, I'm going to look out till 2021 or 2022. Give me a reason to justify not to downgrade you so that you can continue to raise more debt, which, by the way, is free. So you have all these dynamics where I think the capital markets are in an expansive mood and an expansive mode. And in that, I actually think there's a real bid to employment, because there isn't really that many ways now you can, without just getting completely ripped apart, put money to work. And so the real earnest capital allocation strategy that's left for most CEOs is to actually buy things, invest in things, try more things. And all of those, I think, lead to net employment. So in general, I'm kind of constructive and bullish. And I don't think that this idea that there's a permanent unemployment class sticks around.
Friedberg, what are your thoughts? Obviously, a lot of Americans work in retail. We obviously have all these restaurant workers who are out of work, and travel is now hitting the end of the furloughs at a lot of these different airlines, et cetera. What's your thought on this unemployment, middle America catastrophe?
Well, I don't think happiness comes from, absolute standards of living. I think happiness arises from one's relative standard of living, whether that's relative to how you lived last year or how you're living relative to your neighbor, and seeing some progression over time is the only thing that keeps people happy. It's otherwise society decays. So the notion of some sort of flatlined or even flatlined and inflation adjusted basic income level for a large number of people will inevitably result in kind of what we're trying to prevent, which is, some sort of decay, societal decay. We have to resolve the opportunity framework for people, which is how do you give people an opportunity to kind of progress in their lives and earn more over time and have access to, doing more with themselves while they're here on planet Earth. I mean, that's just what humans need. So, maybe there's a short-term fix, but I think we've got some structural things to fix to kind of enable opportunities and give people kind of an inherent, stepladder in life. I heard a really dark theory a few years ago, which is if we do this, we're going to resolve to a world where we're going to have a bunch of people playing video games, because then the only way you can get people to feel like they're progressing in their lives is to give them more medals on their video games and give them a higher ranking and score. And that's where society kind of gets to kind of keep people psychologically kind of satiated. And it's a pretty dark, sad place if that's where we end up. It's like a bad episode of Black Mirror, but we've had a few episodes of Black Mirror this year. So,
it sounds like Ready Player One, where the masters were playing video games instead of actually going out in the real world.
Right. Totally.
Sacks, what's your thought on, just the next 2 years, let's say, and how this all shakes out? And this will give us a good segue into the coronavirus and where we stand right now with this potential second lockdown and the impact that might have psychologically on people and also on the economy.
There's not going to be a second lockdown. It doesn't make any sense. And even if there were, people aren't going to support it. Certainly any of the red states aren't going to do it. I guess the blue states they still haven't, sort of unlocked down. So maybe that gets more protracted in places like California. But we're not going to go back into lockdowns and people won't support it. And I think the thing that we basically figured out that should have been obvious months ago now is that coronavirus is really like two different diseases in terms of its effects on people. So for elderly people and for people with risk factors, it's very dangerous. I'm very worried about my parents, and, for people in that group, they have to take, extreme precautions. But for young, healthy people without risk factors, it's not been that deadly. It's very unpleasant. It's a very bad 2 weeks. But for example, if you look at the data now on colleges coming back, there's been some reports that the virus is spreading like wildfire on college campuses. That's true, but hospitalizations and deaths have not gone up. And so, because it's just not that, deadly to younger people. And so I think this idea of shutting down the whole economy to protect people at risk just seems like overkill. And I think if we had to do it all over again, we wouldn't have done lockdowns. We just would have protected at-risk people.
We've still consistently had 1,000 deaths a day. We thought this might go down. What are your thoughts on Americans just being okay with that basic death toll, Sacks?
Well, I mean, any death is obviously bad and tragic, and and statistically, there are going to be people who die even who are in the low risk group. So for sure, but we've had about 200,000 deaths. The original estimates from this virus were 2 to 3 million. So I guess my point is not that it's not bad, but but that it's much less deadly than I think was originally thought.
There's an argument that that's not deaths directly attributable to coronavirus, right? And that the vast majority of those folks had comorbidities, and that the primary driver. This is an argument many have made. I'm not going to take a strong point. But 85% plus of folks have significant comorbidities. And this virus maybe kind of has a contributing factor to their death. But if let's assume everyone in the United States had coronavirus today, then every death that was reported today would be reported as a coronavirus death. And so they're testing a lot of folks, in the hospital, finding that they have coronavirus. It's very difficult to then prove that the reason that they died, or the sole reason that they died, was coronavirus.
If you had to pick a percentage, Friedberg, where would you put it? Half of all deaths? If you just had to guess.
But that's my point, is I don't think it's one thing, right? I'm not sure that it's someone goes into the hospital with coronavirus and they've also got severe diabetes, heart disease, cancer, they're on chemotherapy. I mean, you could list the other things that they might have. What caused their death? You can't, as a coroner, it's very difficult to say this one thing caused the death. But when they test that person and they find that they're coronavirus positive, that number is now being counted in the statistics that say that was a coronavirus death that day. And coronavirus is so prevalent in the United States right now. It's such a significant part of the population. It's also very difficult to say, hey guys, these deaths are... So I'm not trying to belittle the fact that people are absolutely dying and they wouldn't have died if not for coronavirus. That is absolutely happening. But it's very difficult to say what is the net effect on life right now. We're still learning a lot about how this virus interacts with different people based on their genetics and based on their disease state and other factors.
Let me ask you one more way for you, Friedberg, and then I'll give it over to Chamath, which is, Friedberg, in your estimation as a scientist and somebody who's I would say a man of science on the call here, are you optimistic